we'll go ahead and get started. For those of you that do not know, I'm a current member of the Board of Architecture and Interior Design, and I'm serving the about midway towards my second term. But I did do a third term back at the beginning of the century. Boy, how lucky are we to be able to say that, huh? And some of these rules came to be at that time, and then some later modifications are more recent. And so we're going to walk through those. First, I'm going to go through these mandatory slides. What we're going to do here is essentially talk about the rules, review them, give you a little history of how we got where we are. The history is important simply because I suspect if you haven't already done so, you're going to at some point get into a conversation with a building official over what is and what isn't the right approach. Hopefully, when we're done with this, you will know what the right approach is, but more importantly, you'll know how we got to the right approach so that you can have that in your back pocket when you're speaking to them. Because my sense of it, having had many conversations with way more building officials than I want to admit, um, is that each individual's opinion is not actually an opinion of the current view, but rather an opinion of some sort of juxtaposition of the history leading up to the current view. So it's important to have the history. So before moving on, we're going to review the Florida laws and rules regarding signing and sealing of official documents, history and current. And then we're going to talk about how to apply these rules in everyday practice while you're ensuring that you meet the legal requirements, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. And then talk about ways of securing the electronic process so that you prevent unlawful use or unauthorized use of your seal, and so that you comply with the security requirements that are in the rules. And then just some real world issues regarding the process from both the practitioner and the building official side. In actuality, when we started to set this up, we had hoped that a couple of folks from the BOAF would join in so they could give us their perspective, and they were unable to do so. So we're going to cover that, but we're going to cover my understanding of their perspective, which of course is still at some point my understanding anyway. So the original language that we're dealing with was added to the rules in April of 2006, and it really came about at the request of Florida DOT, which was in a situation where they had gone electronic delivery, electronic signature, and seal long before for their road projects, and their entire project management system was computer based, and architects were the only consultants that were not allowed at the time to sign and seal electronically, and so it hindered their participation in that they had to work around to ultimately be able to transmit stuff electronically. The text of all the requirements that you'll see in the first versions of the rule, particularly the security protocols, came directly from them, literally verbatim. They were placed in the rules, and it resulted from the software that they themselves had written and published, which was available freely. And everybody said, "Well, hey, you don't have to buy anything special here. You just download this," which was called PEDS. You may or may not have heard that term. It stood for Professional Electronic Data Delivery System. And the name is important because in reality, it was a delivery system. It was not intended to be an electronic signing and sealing methodology, although it required one in order for true electronic delivery. And so it was added to it. But what happened was that it made it, first of all, the program was very clunky. And you had to have it in order to access the drawings. You couldn't access it through any normal PDF software for verification purposes. You had to open this software, and even though it was freely downloadable, those of us that were working in large corporations that had IT protocols, and obviously the municipalities, are just not free to download stuff, and so that became a problem. On top of the program being clunky, in part because it was intended as a delivery system. So it had all kinds of project specific information that came up in dialog boxes that you were expected to fill in. And nobody bothered to tell people that you could actually use the submission and electronic seal protocols without filling all this garbage in. And so everybody was that was part of the clunkiness. Nobody could figure out how to use it. Nobody could figure out that you could just go past that window that was requiring all this information that really wasn't required. And so it really just never took off, particularly with architects. But what it did do is it planted the seeds, primarily with the board. I had been arguing unsuccessfully with the board that we needed to go this route. There was a lot of pushback relative to security. I sort of had, drank the Kool-Aid, and I understood that the security, in my opinion, was actually better. I had actually proven it to him by going out and buying a seal in preparation for a meeting where we were going to have this discussion. I literally went online, bought a seal for David Manassi, who, if you don't know, is the board's prosecuting attorney, not an architect. I gave him the middle name Fake. And so I got on, I bought a seal for David Fake Manassi. I created a license number that just was totally different than any numbering nomenclature or protocol that the state had, just as a way to prove that there was nothing being checked, because had there been a check, a lot of these things would have triggered a stop. And in all honesty, the only thing they checked was my credit card for being valid. 3 days later, I had the seal, and then I promptly stamped a bunch of cards and walked into the meeting and handed every member of the board at the time a copy of David's newly minted seal and welcomed him to the profession. And everybody laughed and giggled, but I think I got my point across. So we started to get that, and we had conversations about that. But what happened was that all of these rules that had been put in were hard to understand. Nobody really got them. What a lot of folks may not know is that the board, like most other boards, really doesn't have any way to give a formal clarification or opinion unless it comes as a result of a disciplinary proceeding, or if someone petitions the board for a declaratory statement. It's a formal process. It doesn't really cost anything, but you do have to go through that process. Otherwise, the only thing I or any other member of the board can render an opinion on is something that's been specifically talked about during an official board meeting. So I went ahead in 2011 and I petitioned the board for a declaratory statement, a copy of which is in the handouts. And I asked two specific questions, which seemed to be aimed at resolving most of the questions that we were getting from practitioners. One was, may the electronic signature described in Rule 05 be used in lieu of the physical signature and impression seal required by Rule 01? And the second was, and we'll talk about, we'll actually review those rules in a second. So allow me to just flash through the numbers for the sake of brevity. And then the second was, may an electronic image of the physical signature and impression seal required by O1 be made and included on a secured electronic portable document file and used to meet the requirements of 481.221, which are the submittal requirements that require us to sign and seal the drawings. The board answered yes to both. And silly me, I thought this is going to clarify everything. Surely we've made it very clear. The reason I used the language physical signature and impression seal was the actual language that was in the rule at the time, and it also used the embossed image. So unfortunately, it still didn't satisfy everyone. And so in 2012, we began a process to refine the rules to make them clearer. This is not here with an expectation that you read them, obviously, but you will get a copy of this. It's one of the handouts, and you can see where how the changes really sort of move through. Rule 05 is the one where the nuts and bolts, if you will, of what is required is included. And so in 2012, the first change was the blue language that was added, which basically said that a scanned image of an original signature shall not be used in lieu of a digital or electronic signature. And I'll come back to that a bit later. That's actually an important sentence. And then the others were that the date that the electronic signature file was created or the digital signature was placed into the document has to appear in the document the same as you would have added the date when you physically signed the document prior to this manually. And then secondly, and this is important because a lot of people are out there saying, oh, you require to have third-party authentication. Well, no. The rule clearly says an architect or interior designer utilizing a digital signature shall assure the digital signature is. That means you're the one that has to assure it, not some third party. There are 4 elements that have to be met. One is the signature is unique to the person using it. We'll talk about how you do this with current methodology at the end of the seminar. The second is it has to be capable of verification. The third is it has to be under the sole control of the person using it. And then it has to be linked to a document in such a way that the signature is invalidated if any data in the document is changed or are changed. The rest of it was we struck out a bunch of stuff that was in the security protocols. You can see that. And this started to clean things up. So, we thought, okay, we sort of have this, we're almost there. But we didn't. So the one thing that was remaining comes out in 2013 when the rule was again modified. Most of the language that you see, the red is what was modified. Most of it was clarifying, but what really changed here was what was struck out at the end of number 3. If you can see it, where it said a report shall be created that contains the architect's blah 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 blah, that got struck. That was original language that came out of PEDS. PEDS required that with the electronic submission, you were to write a report or an index, if you would, that listed the drawings that you intended to sign and seal electronically by file name, and you would manually sign and seal that report and submit it with the electronic submission. Well, that sort of argues against true electronic submission. So it was important to remove that from the requirement. And once we had the other changes incorporated in 2012, that sort of clarified that the intent was that when you did this electronically, it was verifiable without the need of a report. We were able to take the report requirement out. So the biggest change that happens in 2013 is boom, report gets knocked out. Believe it or not, there are still building departments that ask about the report, but hey. So the current language as it stands today is this one, '05. You can see just from the first slide just how short we managed to get it, contrary to what government does best, which is make things longer. So we took out, we still labeled the security, the standard for security protocols, because that's kind of key, and it is actually out of the federal government standards. But you don't, as an architect, need to worry about this, because all you have to do is buy a software that's going to meet this standard, and virtually every piece of software out there today that we would be talking about using for this does. The other change that happened, and both in 12 and 13, and I combined them here because it's a lot smaller, is to Rule '01. So '01, in essence, is, we'll call this the scoping rule. It's the one that says that you will acquire a seal with which you will identify all plans which are prepared or issued by you and filed for public record. And then we modified the language in 2013. The first in 2012, what we did was we added the where required electronic files may be sealed in accordance with Rule '05. That was not in here before, and we wanted to direct people to '05 for what the protocols were intended to be. And then in 13, we went in and we said, look, the seal only needs to be capable of leaving a permanent ink representation or some other form of embossing or opaque and permanent impression, which may also be computer generated impressions. And we did that because the word impression to a lot of people still meant that it could not be a digital image. It could not be an image at all, because it was not an impression. It's just old fashioned thinking. So he said, all right, let's just make this clear. And so we left other form of embossing in there, which is the old language. We added permanent ink representation, which means you can actually buy a stamp and, use a physical stamp or some sort of computer generated impressions, just to make sure that there was nobody with a different opinion of what the hell this meant. So shortly after that, and this is what that rule ultimately looks like and looks like today: short, brief, to the point. Get the point across and move on. So in order to clarify that, I asked the board, and the board authorized the writing of a letter focused or written to building officials that would notify them of the rule changes and clarify how the changes affected the architect's use of electronic signing and sealing. In other words, it wasn't a letter that was going to say, hey, this is what the change is now. It was more of a letter that said, here's how it affects architects in operation. And that letter is also in here. I happen to be chair of the board when this was done, so it's under my signature, but fully authorized by the board. In a nutshell, what the letter conveys is that architects and designers and interior designers may now use graphic representations of their professional seals, which include any of these applications, on official documents. So it says, okay, look, all of this gobbledygook basically says you can use any image of your seal. And then advise that the Rule '01 and '02 have been revised effective 2013 to remove the requirement that seals be embossed or provide a raised impression. So just to clarify, yeah, you can use an image, and yeah, the requirement for an embossed seal is gone. And then finally, it's no longer required that an architect or interior designer create, print, and manually sign and seal a report to accompany the electronically signed and sealed document. This was sent out to two organizations. One was the Building Officials Association of Florida, with a request that they, send it out to their members, that they put it on their website. I believe it may still be available on their website. It was placed on the BOAID website, and it was also sent out to the BCAI, the Building Code Administrators and Inspectors Board, which regulates building officials, for similar reasons, to get it spread out. I personally keep a copy of the letter because I find that nobody reads their mail anyway. So if I'm ever challenged, I basically whip out the letter and I say, hey, here's the letter. And by the way, if you notice, the signature on the letter and the signature on these drawings are the same. Doesn't usually carry a whole lot of weight, but at least it's something that says, I'm not pulling this out of thin air. This is really real. And the letter's available to you all, and that's why it's a handout. If it can serve that purpose for you, then great. So, the legal requirements, then, beyond the rules, essentially, what we are looking for is that the content, and these three terms in red are software industry terms that you may hear used. What you really are asked to do is ensure that A, the content cannot or has not been altered, and that's document integrity. That the document is coming from the actual person who sent it, which is authenticity. So it was really issued by the person that's authorized to issue it, and then that the individual who signed it cannot deny the signature. That's repudiation. In other words, you can't say, no, that's not my signature. Because in manual signature, you can always look at a handwriting expert can always say, no, this wasn't signed by the same person. So we need an electronic version of that, right? So how exactly do we do this? Well, part of the exercise that was going on, the board had asked the board office to contact Adobe at the time and see if they would confirm that all of that gobbledygook in the federal security protocols was in fact met by Adobe. And Terry McEwen in the board office did an amazing job. She actually contacted FDOT, got a hold of the people that were responsible for creating PEDs, since it was that language that was inserted into the rule, and asked them if they would provide an interpretation or a review or confirmation whether or not readily available software met that protocol. And they responded that in fact it did. Now the review was focused on Adobe Acrobat, but in reality, Bluebeam, even the standard version of Bluebeam, meets the standard and now actually exceeds it. And this is true all the way back to about version 6 or 7 with Acrobat, and at least back to 2012 with Bluebeam. And the only and all versions of it. So any, or I should say most, if not all, of the mainstream business PDF Maker software has this basic capability built in. It's not something you have to buy. Now, back in the older versions with Acrobat 6 and 7, you did have to have Acrobat Pro. The standard Acrobat standard didn't have this, or it had a reduced basic capability. But today, that capability is built in. Um, and I focus on mainstream business PDF software because there are some kind of small, clunky third-party things that you can buy for, like, $29.12. Some of those may not have that. But certainly if you're buying Bluebeam, if you're buying Acrobat, if you're buying any of the mainstream ones, and those are I think probably the two best known, at least to us anyway, as architects, it's there. It's not necessary to buy anything fancy, anything additional. The minimum requirements can be met with the basic capabilities that are in there. There's no need for third party verification. We already went that in the rule. We're going to discuss that a little bit more later as well. Um, Although there are enhanced security measures which are available as third party plugins, they're called certificates. These are two of the outfits that provide it. There's another one called Ensure. There's about 12 or 13. If you want to find out who they are, you can actually go on the Adobe website and look for their partners, and you'll get a list of that. And you can buy that capability if you want it. But it's entirely your choice to do so. It's not something that is required by rule or law or any other source. Um, in reality, the third party plugins are really, my opinion, not that critical or useful unless you're doing as some kind of a broadcast distribution to multiple parties, not just to the building department and the building contractors. And particularly if those multiple parties are being asked to sign or authenticate the document, then the certificates do provide an extra layer of security and capability that isn't in the basic document, or rather software, that we're talking about. Now, we said we'd talk a little bit about building department considerations. Here's the problem. We've just gone through um, requirements that the document be secured. Essentially, that's what these ABCD requirements are. I repeated them here for ease of review. The agency concerns should not focus on the type of file or the security used to submit it. That's not really their call. That's the call of the board, and it's the call of the architect. It's like, what car do you want to drive? Are you required to drive a certain type of car in order to navigate the streets of your city? Well, no. There's this document called the Constitution that says you cannot do that. Um, it does not say or require the rule any type of third party authentication, as we just talked about a few minutes ago. It does place the burden on you. Okay. So you have to be comfortable that these four things are being met. And I think, hopefully I'm giving you that confidence, and you can read more about this. Bluebeam has a pretty robust site as well. The Adobe one is, I think, more robust. If you go on the Adobe Acrobat help site, the support site, and look at either the user manual or the blogs that they use, you can find all of this information. It's really quite clear. However, the building departments do have valid concerns or really issues, but there are ones that deal with the use and process of the file once you submit it, not the fact that you are submitting it that way, because then they have to process it, meaning review, and then make it available for use as an approved document to you, to the public, to the contractor. And there are some issues there, because if you're submitting a secure document, by definition, that means that document cannot be marked up. So yeah, they're going to have to solve that. Um, but that's their problem to solve. And there is software out there. It is costly, so a small municipality building department may not be able to afford this stuff. Miami-Dade County went out and, as far as I understand it, wrote their own. They may have just taken something off the shelf and severely modified it, but whatever. They can write over the secured document. It's essentially a layer over the document, as I understand it, where they put their comments, not their comments per se, but their action, whether it's been approved um, or denied, or comments issued, and then the comments are available somewhere else on their webpage. The building department has to be able to do that. How they do that should not become our problem. They cannot or should not impose an additional burden on the architect in order to accomplish that, because that may potentially be a restriction of a state granted right, which is your ability to function as an architect. They really can't impede that. The local municipalities, and we've all had this conversation, particularly around building code. They can always impose a stricter standard, okay? But this is not a stricter standard per se. This is a limitation on your use of that seal. And actually, if you run into situations where that is happening, I would urge you to funnel it up to AI Florida so that they can funnel it to the board, because we would both love to know about this and be able to step in and provide knowledge and information to the extent that it's applicable to try and remedy it. I'm not saying that this is absolutely not something that they can't do, or something that they can't do. That's a double negative. But I'm saying it's likely not possible. And so we would love the opportunity to review it and step in and say, yeah, okay, you can do that. Or, oh, no, you can't. Sorry. Because what's happening is all of these municipalities are going out there trying to do their own thing and reinventing the wheel in the process of doing that. And so that's where the problems begin to occur. And everybody reinvents their wheel, and oddly enough, the wheel has different spokes on it, and some wheels have a tendency to be a little squarer than others. So what are the options? Let's go through and look at what the more common ways of doing this are. And I'm going to add some things here that are basically being informed by the questions that were asked at Tuesday's um, session. about signing and sealing and what the requirements are. And one of the most important ones that got asked a couple of times on Tuesday was if a municipality is asking for the documents in a binder, in other words, all the pages combined, can we just sign the cover sheet or the index? No, that rule has not been affected. You still have to sign and seal every individual sheet of drawings. The specification can still be signed at the table of contents as was currently available when we were doing this manually. So if a municipality is telling you you can sign this one, just the cover sheet, do not, because you might make them happy, but you've technically violated a practice rule. That has not changed. So there's 4 bullet points here about many ways to go about it. In reality, there's probably twice as many of these, but we're going to go over these. They're probably the simplest, just to give you a sense of how to do it. And I don't claim to be an expert at Adobe or a power user in any way, but how to do it, and more importantly, is this enough? So starting from the top and working towards the more restrictive, you may want to just use a stamp style seal or the image of a seal just to save on squeezing the damn thing and then manually sign the document and submit it. Of course, if you're going to electronically submit it, then you've got to scan that document. And now remember that rule that I said was going to have a little bit of a roll at the end. You are not allowed to submit a scanned image of your signature. Okay, that's still not allowed. And that was important because Dade County, when they started doing it, they kept telling architects, well, look, building department, for those of you that don't know, happens to be next door to I think it's an Office Depot. It might be an Office Max. And they were telling people, we've got a service that we can do it. It'll cost you a modest amount, and it'll delay the process a couple of days. Or you can go next door to the Office Depot and scan your drawings and then bring back the scans, and we'll accept it that way. Well, if you do that, you're violating that rule because you're now submitting a scanned image of your signature. And I had a very interesting conversation with a building official or building plan reviewer about this, who actually kind of got up in my face about it. And we kept going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And at one point he said, well, how do you know that you're not wrong and everybody else is right? I was saying, essentially, you're telling architects to break the law. Oh, no, we're not. I said, yeah, you are. And we went all of those rounds. And so he finally says, well, how do you know you're not wrong and everybody else is right? And I said, well, I wrote the rule. And it was kind of sweet. It's the only time I've ever done that in about 25 years of actively being involved in processes like this. And I kind of sat back and I said, well, first of all, I lied. I wasn't the only one that wrote the rule. But then I thought, man, that was sweet. Let's not ruin the moment and move on. You cannot scan it, okay? But you may want to do this. This is no different. Some of you that are licensed in multiple states are going to be working already in states that allow a seal, a stamp. Stamps have been allowed forever. So that's one option, okay? Next option is to use the image of the seal and sign it electronically using a tablet. Now, what do I mean by that? I've got a tablet that I can write on, that I can sketch on. And this is what I use, Bluebeam. I use both Bluebeam and Adobe, but Bluebeam is better for sketching. So I will take a document, I'll put the seal on the document, I'll open it up in Bluebeam, I'll open up my tablet and physically sign on the screen, and the image of my signature appears. You're still doing a manual signature, aren't you? But it is electronic. So that's one option. If you don't have that, you can use the image of the seal and sign with a scanned image of your signature. Now, some of you are saying, he just said we couldn't do that. Okay, what I said was you cannot submit a scanned image of your signature as a document. You can scan the image of your signature and import it into the document, and then secure the document with that scanned image, and that you can do. And I'll show you one option of doing that shortly. And then finally, you can use the image of the seal and sign digitally using the software protocols for doing that. And I'm going to come out of here now and go over to my Adobe, and I've got an old drawing file actually that I'm going to use for demonstration purposes. And as you can see, a couple of things to note, and that is, if you look at the rules, we haven't really covered this rule, but there is a rule that shows the image of the seal. And in that rule, it describes that the seal should be a 2-inch diameter. One of the problems with scanning an image of your seal or creating an image. We didn't scan an image. We actually drew an image of the seal and then saved it as a JPEG for ease of use. But one of the problems with that is when you import it into a document, it comes in at whatever size. And we've all done that with inserting pictures and stuff. You don't know what size it comes into, but then you can resize it once it's in the document. Well, how do you know on a document like this that it's actually 2 inches? So one of the things that we did, and we didn't do it for that reason, we actually, this is, our title block has looked like this for um, probably 30 years. But you see that circle, a lot of you have this on your drawing, it's your seal circle. We all have that magical seal circle. What we did is we went back and we looked at our title block and ensured that that circle was 2 inches diameter physically when the title block prints. And in doing that, I give myself a border that now when I place the image into the document, I can use to size so that I know when I'm doing that and I'm doing it at the document at this scale, when I put that image on there, if I were to import the image raw, that if I size it to that, I've met the 2 inch requirement. First compliance, okay? There are two ways to put that seal in there. More often than not, I have our CAD guys place the image on the CAD file before making the PDF and then remove it. I do not leave the seal on the title block because that's an unsecure way of doing things. And I'm very careful to tell my people not to ever submit anything without a seal or with a seal unless I specifically tell them to apply the seal. So that's one way to do it. There are a couple of other ways, including bringing the image into this file directly. One of the things that I did was I took a little bit of time, and when you go into this, and I apologize, my computer's been acting up a little bit the last couple of days, and it has a tendency to run slow. But here's the stamp option of Acrobat. I hope some of you are familiar with it. And here you can create your own stamp. So you can go into this option and create a stamp that allows you all kinds of opportunities to create this stamp, including pulling an image in. So you could literally go browse for that image, and I've got an image of my seal on the desktop for demonstration surface purposes. And there you go. I can now create a stamp that has the image of my seal. Now I already did that. And so one of the ways that I've got it is if you go in here, here's my shop drawing stamp. I did that for that as well, but here's my seal. And I took the time when I created that stamp to make sure that it was 2 inches so that if I want to put it out here, I know it's 2 inches already, and I don't have to resize it. But look, I put the seal on and there you go. Now, at this point, I can literally just save the file, go open it up on Bluebeam, sign it, and obviously I'm doing all the files at the same time, and then save it with my signature over it, and then ultimately secure the document, and we're done. So once you do this, if you're going to use the software opportunities, there are a bunch of different ways that you can do this, and you can see here that I've opened up. Now I've got a digitally signed opportunity, a certify with visible signature and certify with invisible signature. And I'm going to go over here first, and you're going to get this dialog box which tells you the first you have to click and drag the area where you want to place it. So I'm going to place it there, and now a dialog box is going to open. And see, I've already got some that I've already created, and here's my favorite, Seminar Bob. So I'm going to use Seminar Bob today and hit continue, and this is what that's going to look like. And I'm going to enter, here's the security portion of the program, folks, my password once my keyboard decides to work with me. And I tell it to sign, and I'm going to save the drawing. See, it's asking me to save the PDF. I'm going to save it right over on itself. And there is my digital signature now applied. Seminar Bob has officially signed this document. This is secure. It says the date, so you're in compliance with this, applying the date to your signature. You see what happens when I highlighted it? It says it's a valid signature. It's automatically giving you validation. It tells you who signed it. This, by the way, when you create it, you have the opportunity to select what information goes on there. And you can have your name go in there, or you can actually drop an image in there if you want to. Now, I've played with dropping an image of the seal in there. It gets a little clunky, and I just haven't taken the time to do it. Theoretically, if I size the box so that the signature or the seal would fit in this spot and create a 2-inch diameter circle, I could use this and do both at one time. I just haven't taken the time to do it because more often than not, I will manually sign over it. But see, once you click this, look at what happens. It tells you that the signature is valid. Now, it already told you that when I just highlighted it. But more importantly, it also tells you that the document has not been modified since this signature was applied. If it has, and it was modified by someone authorized to modify it, it would tell you when it was modified and by whom. If it was modified by someone not authorized to modify it, it would not appear because it basically blows it away. And then it tells you the document is signed by the current user simply because it recognizes that the one asking for the validation is me. So there it is. If you want more information, signature property, it gives you all of this other stuff. If you want to see the certificate, which I created, it's called a self-created certificate. Here it is, and you can see when I entered all of that stuff. This is a summary. Seminar Bob works for We Be Architects, and they're at that email address, and this is the validity date because these things are set up to expire at a certain point to force you to redo them. And there's more details, which here's all your security protocol garbage, revocation, trust, any policies that are attached to it. If you have any restrictions, you can. I don't. And all of that information is readily available to anyone who opens this in any PDF software. So this is not a matter of you got to use the right software. No, it doesn't work that way. There's another way to do this, and just for to expedite this process and not take too much time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this file. I shouldn't have closed that because that was not what I intended. And I'm going to open another clean one because that one that we just closed is now a certified document. I will not be able to modify it. So this is the same drawing again, but you'll notice I haven't done anything to it. Here's another way to sign this document. I'm going to go in first and I'm going to put my seal in. Same way I did it before because I didn't bother to do these with the seal already on them. So there it is. And now I'm going to switch over here. And instead of going to certificates, I'm going to go to fill and sign. When you go to fill and sign, you get this interface up here. And this is going to come up when you click this. And you can see that I've already added a signature. So I'm going to eliminate this. And I want to show you how I did that. Right now, there's no signature on here. If I hit add signature, this dialog box pops open. I've got three options here. I can type the signature, which is what you see, and this comes up as without my middle initial. So because this is an official document, I'm going to modify it. It's got a few font styles that you can select. I'm not particularly fond of any of these, but what the hell, I don't use it. And now if you wanted to use this, you would hit apply, and it's going to show up on the document. I'll do that at the very end to show you what happens next. But first, I want to go to another option, which is draw it. So if you had a tablet, you could literally come in here, and I'm using my mouse, which is not a great way, but you can see that I'm essentially trying to draw some gibberish on here. This would be your signature with the proper tools. And then once you did that, you would hit apply. And you can either check this box to save it so that it would be saved and come up when you hit this little click up here, this link, or not, okay? Lastly, you could come in here and go select image, which is how I had the one that came up originally. And you can see here on my desktop, I've got the image of my scanned signature already there for our purposes. Pulls it up, there it is. And then if this is the way I want to do it, the next thing you do is you hit apply, and here's my signature. And I can place this signature where I want it. Now, when you do this way, my image that I scanned, because this is a very old scanned image, I actually have been meaning to redo it, has a white background. So what happens is if I place it over the seal, and the seal has a white background also. So if I place it over the seal, either the seal will be over will cover part of the signature or the signature part of the seal, depending on which one is at the uppermost layer. So to avoid that, when you scan this, you have to make sure that you have a clear or transparent background, and then you avoid those problems. So for our purposes right now, I'm just going to do it like that. When you click that on there, you see you can increase the size or decrease the size, or you can grab the handle and adjust the size, move it into whatever location you want, and there it is. and now you have signed the document. Now, notice that what is missing from this process is the date. So in this instance, what I would do is I would add the date in there by using an add text feature like this one and go XXX. My keyboard is, there you go, and size it accordingly, and that would satisfy the state requirement that you date your signature. Now when you're done doing that, you then have to basically secure the document. So now you come in here, because this is not a digital, a certificate signature. The certificate signature automatically secures the document. Here you come back in and you go, actually, before I leave this, here's the profile. You're wondering where that information came from. It's all filled in here. And I've gone through this, and I've got my office address on there and my email and my phone number, and this is the profile that gets attached to this for verification purposes. Now the next step is I've got to secure this document, so I go in here and I go to protect, and when that opens up, hello, when that opens up, there we go, you've got these options here, and I'm going to focus on encrypt. And you're going to want to encrypt a certificate or with password. Now, I'm going to do certificate first just to show you something. If you hit that, this is going to come up, okay? And it's going to have these options. I'm going to encrypt all document contents. You can, choose to encrypt the contents with, but no metadata, et cetera, et cetera. You hit next, and there's a certificate that exists. If you have multiples, they'll be here. Remember, this is self-created. This is not a certificate I bought. And then I hit next. And when I hit finish, it's going to encrypt it. Now it says the security settings will not be applied until you save the document. That's going to be true all the time. This document is not yet secure. When I save it and I hit OK, you're going to see, there you go. Notice that it now says secured. This document is now not modifiable. And here's the proof. You go over here, you can save it as, you can save it, but you cannot, wait a minute, I'm in the wrong place. Let's see what's going to come up here. I'm not sure, actually. I just saved the document, and now, see, I no longer have the option to save. You can save it as and rename it, but once you do that, it's no longer a secure document. And actually, in some settings, I don't think this is one of them. It actually won't let me do that. I guess it's going to let me do that here. So now I'm going to go to another document to show you the next opportunity. Trying to make sure. I'm going to wrap up here. And actually, if you guys want to start sending questions in now, because we're 15 minutes from the close, and I want to make sure that I allow enough time for that, please go ahead and do that, and I can probably answer some of them over, while I'm doing this. Because yesterday we ran out a little bit short on time for questions. What I'm going to do with this one, I'm not even going to bother putting the signature and the seal on it, because you all know how to do that. But if we go to secure, to protect, and we go here, and this time we select encrypt with password, you're going to get this screen. And here you're going to have the choice. You do not want to click this because, folks, read before you click. Require a password to open the document. That means nobody's going to be able to open it if they don't know the password. So please do not do that. But you do want to go here, restrict editing and printing of the document, which says that a password will be required in order to change these settings. And you don't want to allow changes. You can see here what the options are. You can allow someone to insert, delete, and rotate pages, fill in the form fields, et cetera, et cetera. You probably could use one of these versions to allow a building department to apply their information to it. Honestly, I have not researched that fully enough because I don't want them messing with it. If they're going to mess with it, they need to find their own way to do it. But the one you need to click is with printing allowed. You can allow low resolution or high resolution so that someone can actually print this document. Otherwise, no one will be able to do it. And then you come in here and you enter the password that you want used for permissions, for changing permissions. And I'm going to use my simple form password. You can see that it's telling me the strength. I can make it as weak or as strong as I want. Here, I just made it stronger. And when you hit OK, it's going to tell you that the restrictions are enforced as set by the permission password. You just click through this, And now to actually confirm it, you want to hit that password again and watch up the top of the screen, and you're going to see that the document goes secure. Once I do that, this document is now secure. Now you can do that with or without adding a signature if you just want to submit a document that you don't want anybody to mess with. And you have full control over how much messing they can do. And that's always going to be an option. And when you go into this thing, if you now go to comment and you select this, you can see that certain things are going to be able to be done and some are not. You see what happens when I try and modify it? I'm sorry, that's not a security. That's going to happen anyway. I got to recognize the text. It's going to let you do some modifying. It's not going to let you save it, and it's not going to let you modify the contents of the document. And then when it's done doing this, I want to show you one last thing before we open it up fully to questions. Of course, now it's going to take forever. And that is layers in the document, because I have run into this. Miami-Dade County is one of them where I run into it. Let me see if I can actually do that with this secured. A lot of times, this one doesn't have layers. Um, a lot of times when you write the PDF from your drawing software, the AutoCAD particularly has a tendency to write the PDF and maintain the layers that you have set up in your drawing file. And when that happens, there's a fourth icon that shows up in this left margin. That is a bunch of overlaid sheets, and that indicates layers. When you click on that, you're going to get all the layers. You're going to get a list of layers. And some municipalities, including, as I said, Miami-Dade County, have the incorrect belief that if you've got layers, even though the document is secure, you can still mess with the content and the layers. Now, I will tell you that just like CAD, if this document were not secured and it had layers, you can turn on specific layers or turn them off. So yes, you can mess with the content, but once you've secured it, you cannot. Nevertheless, they will not accept the document if they go over here and open it and see that they've got layers. So if this document did have layers, what you want to make sure, well, first of all, when you make the PDF, just make sure that you tell the software not to, to flatten the layers. If you forget to do that and you still got layers, when that icon is clicked and you get the layer view in this pull down, the choices will include flatten layers. And what you want to do is flatten the layers and then save the document with flattened layers so that it does not show up multiple layers. That's going to avoid a problem with from a municipality that just doesn't want to look at things with layers. So that's something important to do when you're making this document. But once you secure this thing as it is now, and you've all worked with secure documents, if those of you that get the some of the AIA national reports, like the salary and compensation reports and all of those things that are published in PDF, will notice that the file is secured and you can't do anything with it. In some instances, you can't even print the document, and that's because they didn't set the allowance for the document to be printed. So I'm going to stop and see what questions we've got. I haven't seen any come up on my chat box, but I don't know if that's turned off, and try and address whatever questions any of you have. So Wendy, what do we have?
Actually, so far we don't have any. We had one comment about the sound, so I'm hoping that most everybody's been able to turn up their volume to be able to hear anything. The only thing that came through, we did have a comment that talking about Tampa, that the city of Tampa does require third-party verification software.
Yeah, they are not supposed to do that. And I would love to find out, and I'm actually going to talk to a few people to see what it is that they're doing and whether or not they actually can do it, because the requirement is not there. The burden is put on the architect. Um, I'm not quite sure why they're requiring third party verification software, if it has anything to do with how they're reviewing it. But in reality, that's not there. And you may want to try pointing out to the rule that says, hey, this is not. But I will tell you, when something like that happens in a big department like that, that has usually not come from the plan reviewer that's telling you this. It's usually coming from management. So it probably is a conversation that you or maybe AIA Tampa wants to have with the building department supervisory people and say, hey, this is putting a burden on us that we don't need to have because it's not required. Um, I don't know enough to say with any certainty whether or not they can actually require it and have it be considered a an enhancement of security that would be allowed. In other words, more restrictive, as opposed to a limitation on your right to sign and seal drawings. That would have to have a lot more information to be able to figure it out. Part of that would be if you're required to submit electronically and you cannot submit in paper, and they say you've got to buy a third party. Well, now they're sort of not allowing you to work in that municipality unless you buy that other software. So we would want to look at that. I can tell you, I forget which one this is. I have worked in the Tampa area. I have worked in the Orlando area. I used to be. This is Brandon. I used to be of the opinion that Miami-Dade County was the toughest building department in the world. I still sort of am, but I can tell you that Tampa and Orlando both challenge, and it's like a race to be first. Um, so I understand the difficulty of dealing with it, but there should not be a need for that. The rule, at least on the architecture board side, does not require third-party authentication. And I think part of it would be to show them, as I've showed you today, that it is verifiable by doing what we did here. If you seal it, if you sign and secure the document that way. I don't know what the current pricing on third party software is. I actually started to do that the other day and got waylaid because one of the providers for Adobe is Symantec, and I use Norton in the office. And I figured, well, let's look at it and see. And I was going to do a free trial. I'm not sure what it cost. I am sure it's going to be a couple of, probably less than a couple of hundred a year, but nevertheless, it's another couple of $100 you have to spend. I apologize for the sound. I've literally had this headset microphone in my mouth most of the time, but I'm at my max volume, and it's a problem that we came up and was brought up on Monday, or rather on Tuesday, by one participant, and we're trying to fix it, but we have not been able to fix it fully, obviously. Any other questions?
Yeah, I actually have about a few more. Um, so how do you sign all drawings which are in a binder?
You have to sign them first. I know that I see who was it. I think the question came from Florida Southwest on Tuesday that their building department wanted a binder. I have actually not run into that. Most building departments want individual sheet files because they have their plan reviewers pull down the ones that they need and not necessarily the whole binder. But if they ask for a binder, then you have to sign the sheets individually before you bind them, because once you bind them and secure it, then you cannot sign them. So that's a potential hiccup that does have a workaround, but it does mean that you have to do the electronic sign and seal prior to. Remember, as I said earlier, the requirements for what has to be signed and how has not changed as far as, every sheet does have to be signed.
Okay, if I'm submitting a set of plans consisting of, say, 10 sheets, that is all contained as one PDF file. I assume I need to stamp on each sheet, but only have the electronic signature on the first or cover sheet?
Huh, that's an interesting question. Technically, the rule still says that each one has to be sealed and signed. So I would say that everyone should be sealed and signed. I would have to look at the actual writing or language of the rule, because an argument can be made that once you bind it, then you really have a single document. You don't have, let's say you've got 20 page or 20 sheet set of documents. Um, I love to argue, so I can argue both ways. I can say, yeah, it's a binder, but it's 20 sheets. So each of the 20 has to be done. I could also argue that once it's bound, um, it's one document. It's not 20 documents anymore. But the truth is that even if you bind it, it can be unbound. And once that happens, then it's a single sheet. Part of the reason for requiring each sheet to be signed and sealed is a security item that is a measure of protection for the architect to ensure that someone cannot, who's unauthorized, cannot insert a revised sheet or a modified sheet into a set that is signed and sealed by a method that requires only one signature at the cover sheet or at the index of drawings, whatever that location is. Realistically, any of the other sheets could be inserted with a change in information, and no one would pick up that difference as long as the sheet resembled what the prior sheet looked like minus the change in information. So one of the reasons for doing that is to avoid unauthorized insertion or deletion from your documents from what you intended. Part of the reason that I argued that this was more secure than the seal is simply that because I have to use a password that's unique to me and I can change it whenever I want to, although that's actually not a good policy because then I forget it. Um, the reality is that it's more secure than my seal, which as we speak is sitting in a drawer right behind me. And when I'm done with this, if I get up and go down the hall to the bathroom, anybody can come in and access it. And let's face it, I've never met an architect in 30 years that has told me, yeah, I've got a little vault for my seal, or even, yeah, I've got a locked drawer for my seal. Now, please, if any of you do not shatter my image of that. But the reality is that most of us don't secure it that way. And so, in order to extend that security, if you have an unsigned sheet and somebody inserts it, mm, it's just one more step. So, yeah, they do still have to be individually signed and sealed, both signed and sealed. That rule has not been modified. I don't remember the rule number, but it's actually not in the ones we discussed. It's elsewhere.
All right, we've got a couple more. This may have been covered in the beginning, but they have been asked in Boca Raton to provide an affidavit form which has the wet seal, ink signature, and also the digital signature with certification number. Is that a requirement necessary?
No, that's the old rule, and that got removed from the rule. And you might want to show them that building official letter that says that number three, and it's on this PDF. If you, it's on the PowerPoint. If you download that, that number three bullet point in that letter speaks specifically to that point. That is no longer a requirement. That was a requirement at the beginning of time, as it were, and it was tied to the PEDs. So that's no longer required.
All right, it says AIA Gainesville had a meeting the day before yesterday with the building department regarding the ferry issue. They did mention the need of a third-party certification, but they have been accepting Adobe signed documents, as you explained earlier. I think that the person that mentioned that from the building department was not familiar with the real meaning of third-party certification.
Yeah, that's also possible. And I'm glad you asked the question because it's a bigger point. Um, First of all, you're having a dialogue with them, which is good. I would probably take this opportunity to have whoever it was, give them this information, have them go back and say, hey, remember we were talking about, well, here, we just happened to have one of our guys have a seminar or participate in a seminar where they dealt specifically with that. And here's why the third party isn't required. But to the bigger point, part of the problem I think that is happening is how people interpret things combined with a lack of detailed knowledge. Most of the people I've worked with or talked to have general knowledge and some detail, but not detail in every area. And so what's happening is, in an honest way, some of these requirements are coming out of an ignorance per se. That's such an ugly word, but in reality, it's a lack of knowledge of the detail that is available and necessary in order to make a sane decision. Um, so take that opportunity to go back and talk to them. It is, in many instances, a fact that it's a misinterpretation. I mean, I could argue that third party verification would be the third party would be the building official. If I'm using Adobe, Adobe would be the first party. I'm signing it. I'm the second party. You're the building official that's verifying it. You're the third party. Hence, therefore, we have third party verification. Now, that's a better argument after a few drinks at happy hour, but nevertheless, that's one way to define third party verification, isn't it? So I think you're right. I think they just don't know. Have that conversation. That's part of the reason why I gave the history at the beginning of the program, so that you all will be aware of where it came from and are better able to describe it and say, yeah, to that signed report. Yeah, that's true. That was originally required, but the rule has since been changed. Here's the documentation. It's no longer required. Why won't you consider just removing that requirement? They don't do anything with that document anyway. In all honesty, in fact, even when Miami-Dade was requiring it, their system is set up so all it can do is upload PDF files, and all it can do, you have to physically take it to them on a CD-ROM. There's no other media that it will accept, and there's no other file that it will accept other than a PDF. So if you had any kind of other document on that CD-ROM, the system would just default to something's wrong with the CD-ROM. So the way we would produce those reports was to scan the report into a PDF and include it with the drawings and submit it on the CD-ROM because it was the only way this silly ass system would upload it. And then, silly me, I'd take the written report to comply with the rule and I'd hand it to them. And on more than one occasion, I literally saw them rip it apart. And on other occasions, scan it themselves and insert it again. So now there were two copies of the scanned report. So, the reality of that report might have been valid at some point back in '06 when this was in its infancy, but there's no use for it. There's no need for it. Are there any other questions?